The Relic project is a creation of Ford Chicago. A relic is an object, custom, or belief that survives from an earlier time. They are often historic and hold sentimental value. The Relic project has two main purposes. The first is to help everyone understand the origins of relics, and the second is to illuminate our core beliefs in the hope of expanding the kingdom in the 21st century. The Relic project comes with 10 distinct titles, and we hope you'll take the time to watch them all.
So I was chatting with a good friend of mine the other day, and we were talking about where he goes to church, and all he could do was whine and complain. You see, he goes to a traditional church. They have a fourfold pattern of worship, and it just seems he's not happy with the organ or the song choices or who's singing. It was kind of comical. And of course, me being a contemporary worship guy, I said, well, why don't you go to the contemporary service? And he said, quite frankly, I'm not in for that. And I said, well, why not? And he said, well, you know, there's the announcements, there's, 4 hours of music. I said, come on. He said, okay, 20 minutes of music, and then the pastor preaches for 35 minutes, and then they do an offering while somebody's playing a guitar underneath, and if I'm lucky, they'll do communion, the Mick communion, where they just throw it at you, and it's over. It's just so unholy, he said. I couldn't stop laughing, and I said, really? How is that unholy? And he goes, well, it's just not biblical. And I immediately stopped. And I said, really? Unbiblical? I said, where is the order of worship in the Bible? And when you say that to someone, it's a drop the mic moment. Because here's the truth. There is not a recommended order of worship in the Bible. It's true. There's not a liturgical lesson plan that's there. It's just not present. So he began to kind of moan a little bit because he knew I had him and didn't know where to go with it. Of course, I brought up, some of the things that I know from the history of the church, and that most of the patterns we've gotten and currently even worship with, either it's Protestant or Catholic, doesn't really matter. Most of those were given to us by other people who made some decisions for us, many of which were actually taken from pagan rituals. Pretty interesting, don't you think? Now, Gregory the Great instituted quite a number of these changes for worship. He was the first one to introduce some of the Judaic temple practices and some of the Greek mystery practices and rituals of purification, and it was Gregory the Great who offered various sacrifices and more participation with folks. Pretty much worship would stay that way for the next 1,000 years or so, until the Reformation, actually a little bit longer than that. And what was going on there is people didn't want to change things, and when the Reformation happened, not much changed. It would be kind of like putting new tinted windows on your old car. I mean, they changed some things, let's be honest. Some things did change. The Bible became more prevalent. If you were a Protestant, the readings were ones that you could understand a little bit more. Then, of course, there were some other practices like communion and other opportunities for people to join in. But in reality, it was just more window dressing. It would take another couple of hundred years for it to significantly change, where participation in worship would be something everyone would get to do. Very interesting, don't you think? That we can claim something is biblical, but the reality is it's just traditional. Traditional in the sense that many people have done it for years and years and years, and we're just not open to the change. The order of worship is a human rendering. Yes, it has emotional attachments to it, but the reality is it's a human rendering of what should happen when one worships the Lord. Did you know that the first churches didn't have bulletins? Kind of amazing, right? It wasn't until 1884 that the first bulletin for a church came into being. Today, if you didn't have something as a bulletin, some piece of paper or something to tell somebody what's coming next, you would have failed, right? was in 1884 or so, Moody actually introduced the idea of asking people to come and give their lives to Christ. Stand up and come forward. Say the prayer. That was all taken from Moody's understanding what people needed to do to be saved. Then you move into the 70s, and of course there were church growth experts who were looking back to the 50s and the heyday of the church. And they were talking about you had to do a children's moment. And so somehow in 1970 started a children's moment that exists to this day in some churches where kids come forward. And it's all justified that the kids need to know the pastor. But don't they? Why do they have to come up front and be the show for the older folks? I never did understand that. And how did that become a part of the order of worship? I don't know. Some of these things have me puzzled, and maybe they have you puzzled too, because the reality is they're all relics. They're relics of a church that's gone by that has become, well, maybe, irrelevant in so many ways. It's as if the traditions of the past are dictating the future and somehow carry the same weight as a biblical moment with Christ, where he said to love God and love others, and also have a bulletin and sing 4 songs and make sure they're hymns and you have an organ. No, I didn't say that. That's right. Jesus never said those things. So next time you're thinking of complaining about how the order of worship goes, realize that there are no rules. And that quite frankly, all can be had if it glorifies God. I hope you'll remember this the next time you go to church and think about the relics and why they're there and why it works the way it does. God bless.